Try to make this quick. I'm going to go through the Cold War and Middle East conflict as fast as I can so it's not like a giant video. So here we go. Here's how we're breaking it down. 3 sections. Cold War slash Middle East, and then Middle East conflict. And here's our presidents in the Cold War. Dwight D. Eisenhower, JFK, Lyndon B. Johnson, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford. The next 2 are kind of like this bridge from the conflict with Russia with the conflict of the Middle East. And that's Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. They had one foot in one type of war and in the other foot in another type of war. And then the Middle East conflict is George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama. I am leaving out Trump and Biden just because they're more recent and it doesn't really fit to do this. First thing is Dwight D. Eisenhower. Here's what you need to know about him. Korean War, Sputnik, Interstate Highway. So let's get to the Korean War. Korean War was a big giant game of tug of war. You have this thing in Korea that separates North Korea and South Korea, and it's the 38th parallel. And after the war, after World War II, we kind of leave, North invades, and throughout this battle, you have the North, which is the communist regime, right? Kim Il-sung, versus the South, a guy named Rey. They're back and forth. The North comes down and takes over parts of South Korea. South pushes back, takes up parts of North Korea, and then it bounces right back to the same line it started. MacArthur's like, let's bomb these guys. Let's use the nuclear bomb on these guys. And Eisenhower's like, yeah, no thank you. We lost 36,000 troops to this war. We didn't really win. It started where it ended where it started. And yeah, it's kind of a black eye on that situation because we still deal with North Korea in a bad way. I mean, we got one heck of a leader up there that we have to deal with. So that's Korean War in a nutshell. Let's get to Federal Highway Act of 1956. This is the interstate highway, just building highways everywhere. It's good because it connects the country, travel further from work. It's an economy boom. Bad thing is, it did destroy some communities because of they would have to build these interstates, and actually the minority communities got hit the worst. Next one is Sputnik. There's a big space race. First satellite in space, Russia. First man in space, Russia. First woman in space, Russia. First to float in space, Russia. But first one to the moon, us. And what did all this start with? Sputnik, the satellite that orbits the Earth. Russia sends it up. It makes us all lose our minds, and boom, we have a space race, and we're going back to the moon. I think next year, pretty soon. That's pretty much it for Eisenhower, at least the fast version. Let's go to JFK. JFK becomes president by facing off Nixon in this highly televised and first televised debate ever. 90% have TV back then. 70 million people watched it. The people that watched it thought JFK did better because he looked youthful and Nixon was sick. The people that listened to it on the radio thought Nixon won. But at the end of the day, JFK wins the election. He's in, just like Flynn. Here we go. First Americans in space in 1961 takes place during the JFK's administration. You have a lot of conflict with Cuba. You have the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we were like literally one soldier away from firing a missile that would cause a devastating thing that who knows what the world will look like today. The Bay of Pigs was us invading Cuba, supplying people to invade Cuba, I should say, actually. 3 days, it was defeated. 1,500 Cubans, exiles versus Cuban military. They lost. It was a tremendous mistake on our part. In retrospect, we were trying to depose Fidel Castro, and it just didn't work out for us. Let's get to the Cuban Missile. I already talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis. J. Edgar Hoover had a lot of stuff. He's another person you know about. Dirt on politicians, one of which is probably going to be JFK as well as many others. He's the guy that didn't like Martin Luther King Jr. Just know he has dirt on pretty much everybody. Eventually, Lee Harvey Oswald kills JFK. JFK is driving around in a car, gets shot right there, dies. We actually have this on film that you can see his death. It's terrible stuff. That's it for JFK. Let's get to LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson. His idea was this great society, Voting Rights Act for everybody to vote. We talked about this during the Civil Rights Movement. Medicaid, federal aid for education, environmental protections, food stamps, Head Start, National Public Radio, Public Broadcasting System, Consumer Protection Laws, and civil rights. He did a lot of stuff, like lots of stuff for the average person, even though he picked up his dog by the ears, and he said some racist things from time to time. He did help out a lot of Americans of all different shapes and sizes and races, but he also got us involved in Vietnam. Another colossal lost on our part. We lost around 58,000 troops in the Vietnam War. It cost us $100 billion, I think. Lots of problems there. We lost because even though we had a better military as far as our military industrial complex goes, they had the home field advantage and they just waited us out. Afghanistan waits out the Russians, even though they had a better military, and Vietnam waits us out. We had to deal with the actual issues with the land itself. They dug tunnels. The Vietnamese underneath us would come after us. We had to go into tunnels. This introduced the draft. People were drafted in this war. It's the last war someone was drafted in. Caused protests, that type of thing. But yeah, we lost that war. And there she goes. Let's get to Nixon. We finally get a man on the moon. We're going to go back. Repeating, we're going back to the moon, but we put a man on the moon. And that's awesome. Like, we set a standard. We have a little flag up there. We have little footsteps up there. That's good stuff. McCarthyism is big here. You have McCarthyism is basically everybody's a communist. This is where you get like this big rush, by the way, of saying under God and the Pledge of Allegiance, because they want to make us look like we're more religious than Russia. You have like a lot of the changes that you might not think. In God we trust on our money gets printed then. People were blacklisted, which means basically they're put on the list that they're bad people. Some people were it's just be afraid of everybody all the time because they might be the enemy, which is not the best way to live. And also you get it wrong more than you get it right type of thing. So Watergate is where Nixon, we know this after the fact, he had people break into the National Democratic Convention to steal files on the Democratic candidates. And then when he was investigated, he fired the lead FBI investigator, which was basically telling everybody that he did it. And then before he was impeached, he resigns. So he got away with being impeached and possibly kicked out of office. The only president to be kicked out of office. Before that ever happened, he just quits. But yeah, one thing is, though, he did establish the relationship with China that still lasts today. I mean, go to the store and try to find something that's not made in China and just be hard pressed. And we buy a lot from them. They get a lot from us. It's a definitely mutual relationship. If one of us stopped doing it, it'd be bad news bears for both of them. Nixon leaves and Gerald Ford takes over. I don't have a lot to say about Gerald Ford. He pardoned Nixon, and because he did that, really his administration isn't known for much else. There was giant inflation and unemployment during his administration, so you can just see how unpopular this guy was. He pardons Nixon, basically says you got away with everything you got done. Then he has all these economic crises, including energy and consumption issues too. Then we get to Jimmy Carter. The only election where the South votes for a Democrat since the Civil Rights Act is Jimmy Carter. He's from Georgia. And he's now in the Middle East / Cold War. He's the one that organizes peace with Egypt and Israel, which is a crazy thing to be able to do. This conflict was going on for a long time. There's an Iran hostage crisis that takes place during his administration. Basically, an embassy is taken over by people in Iran after Mossadegh takes over. It's not Mossadegh. It's one of the leaders, religious leaders of the time. They become a theocracy, which is kind of a scary thing to be. About 52 hostages were held. 8 of them were killed. They were held for 444 days. There was a gas crisis during Carter. There was lines that were just crazy big. And then Carter comes out and gives this long speech. It was an honest speech. It's called the Malaise speech. And he's basically like, we're kind of the problem, which was true. But Americans don't want to hear they're the problem. They just want to hear you solve the problem. Americans are, I don't want to take the rap for this one. Just solve my problem for me. And so he gets voted out. Reagan gets in, and the hostages sat in an airport on the landing strip, and they were released the moment Reagan took office. So Reagan gets the W for that, even though he really didn't do anything. He just think all the Star Wars initiative is a defense project that bankrupted, this wasn't the only thing that bankrupted the Russians and caused the Soviet bloc to fall. But it was one of those things where they were trying to keep up with the Joneses, keep up with us. and it didn't work out to him for a while. There was an attempt to assassination on Reagan. The bullet actually skimmed across the car before it hit him. He's in surgery. When he was in, like, going to the hospital, he goes, "I hope the surgeons are Republicans." That's my impression of Reagan. I have no impressionability at all. He was a very comical guy. He was very funny, very witty. Former actor. He lived in Dixon for a while too, so keep that in mind. Iran-Contra affair is there was illegal guns and arms being sent to people, and basically we gave guns to Iraq to Iran to fight a quasi war over there, and we used profits from arm sales to do so too. So it's you can't do that. And then the Challenger disaster happened during his presidency. That's the one where those we talked about this before, that they died without testing the O-rings, and then they got too cold, and boom, they didn't work, and liquid hydrogen and oxygen exploded, daddy. A Berlin Wall gets teared down. Basically, Germany was split by a wall, and this is a symbolic gesture that the Soviet Union has no more influence in that. George Herbert Walker Bush, not George W. Bush. George Herbert Walker Bush, he's the one that got caught with a bag. He said, "Read my lips, no new taxes." And what does he do? New taxes. But you can't, I get it. He lied, and I think we should hold politicians to the fire when they lie. However, he did what was responsible. Our debt shot up during Reagan. And you're like, well, it shot up more during so-and-so. Yeah, but there's a lot of reasons for that. And he's trying to find a way to pay off what we spent on. He lied about raising taxes. He did. So there you go. He had to deal with Desert Storm. This is like Iraq War episode 1. We're going to get to episode 2 during the other Bush administration. They stopped short from actually taking out Saddam Hussein. And Saddam Hussein's going to stay in leadership and be a thorn in our side for some time to come. The USSR officially breaks apart during his administration. Lots of like big things happen, but the no new taxes is a lifeline. I mean, that's a commercial that people hear. Bill Clinton, the economy was in a huge boom during Bill Clinton. A lot of that has to do with the internet showing up around his time. But yeah, the economy was good. He had a balanced budget, one of the first times in a long time. Deficit was down. There was also a lot of conflicts we don't talk about with him, which is weird. There was a Somalia conflict. There was bombing in Iraq that took place during his presidency. There was a lot of things that took place during his presidency that also were violent. Just there wasn't like an official war type of thing. He was impeached. We talked about this in class. It boils down to the word "is" and whether that "is" means ever or right now. And if you think it means ever, then he was impeached for perjury. If you think is right now, then he technically was telling the truth. Had to do with his relationship with an intern, Monica Lewinsky, and that's why he was impeached. It didn't mean he got kicked out of office. It just means he was one of the few presidents that were impeached. George Walker Bush takes over in 2001 due to crazy elections situation in Florida. And anyway, almost right after he takes office, 9/11 happens. About 3,000 Americans die in the worst terrorist attack on our country's soil since Pearl Harbor. And that spills over into a war in Afghanistan, and then also bleeds over, even though they had nothing to do with it, bleeds over into a war with Iraq. Afghanistan's lasted 20 years, and Iraq was a long war too. So we had the Afghanistan war. We had, I think, 2,400 by last year's count that died in that war. Cost for a 20-year war on terror was about $8 trillion, which is a lot of money. The war lasted from 2001 to 2021. So literally last school year was when it ended. Iraq war lasted from 2003 to 2011. We cost us a bunch of money too. Several U.S. servicemen and women were killed or injured. I think it was 4,500 that were killed, 32,000 that were wounded in action. But yeah, two big wars and a recession. So Bush was in two big wars in a recession. The 2008 recession hits, mass unemployment, that type of thing. Just bad news bears. Barack Obama picks up the ball at the 2008 recession. And the unemployment, I got to talk about this unemployment thing real quick. The unemployment rate goes from like 10%, and during the Obama administration gets it to drop down to like 4.8. It's going to go up again. Trump will bring it down, I think, from 4.8 to 3.6, give or take. And then it shoots up to, I think it was like 15%. And then it comes back down throughout his end of his administration. Then Biden has it down pretty low right now too. And I say they had it down. It just happened during their administration. You can't really blame them. Gay rights was pretty big because of a Supreme Court decision allowed people who are gay to marry other people that they chose without the government stepping in and saying no. And he also ordered the operation to kill Osama bin Laden, the guy who was responsible for the 9/11 attacks. And man, that is a lot of information. And I did it in 16 minutes. I hope it was as enjoyable as it was to get out. Peace, my friends. Out.